Well, greetings to all of you, and welcome back to The Shakedown, a podcast about corrections, by corrections, and for corrections. I am your host, Aaron Dawson, and as always, am tickled to death to be back with you. I hope that you are enjoying season 3 of The Shakedown. I'm having a blast doing it and working with it, so I hope that it's enjoyable to your end. Appreciate you being here, whether you're listening to it from the website, theshakedown.org, or wherever you get your podcasts, or whether you've gone on YouTube and you've searched the Shakedown podcast and you're looking at it there. Let me ask you, if you would be oh so kind, if you're viewing that on YouTube, hit that subscribe, hit that like button. That helps us tremendously get this information out to a larger audience of people. And that's the whole point of this. The whole point of this is to get this information out there to folks. So if you're listening to this, you're not on YouTube, do me a favor. After you've done listening to it, go find it on YouTube, hit that like, hit that subscribe. We would greatly, greatly appreciate it. Real excited about today or this week's episode. Have a very special guest on with me today. Somebody that is not just a colleague, is not just somebody that I respect professionally, but he's someone that I consider a friend and a brother. Mr. Rob Yantis. He's a jail commander out in the great state of South Dakota. And so looking forward to conversing with him today and getting some real hands-on, boots on the ground, if you will, discussion on these House Bill 4972 and Senate Bill 3409. Picking up kind of where we left off last month in our conversation with Mr. Tate McCotter. So, enough about that. So, looking forward to having this conversation with Rob. So, without further ado, let's jump into this interview. Well, all right, ladies and gentlemen, as promised, I am here with Mr. Rob Yantis. I will say, if you have ever been to Jail Con, you have at least had the pleasure of looking at him as he's going back and forth, but hopefully you've had the opportunity to sit in some of his training. I'll say from a personal perspective, I consider him a good friend and definitely a professional. So, Rob, it is awesome to have you with us
so much
today. And
Thank
so,
you.
for those that may not be familiar with who you are and your background, could you give everybody just kind of a snapshot, if you will, of who you are, what you do, so forth and so on?
Sure. So, as Aaron said, my name is Rob Yantis. So, Him and I have bumped into each other quite a bit for a while. It's been a lot of fun. We've been looking forward to this conversation, talked a lot about how we can make a meaningful podcast together. And so I'm pretty excited about it. I'm currently the commander of a jail in Pennington County, which is in Rapid City, South Dakota. And so I've been there for 8 years as the commander. I've been here at the agency for 16. And so a lot of time just, if you're in corrections for very long, it doesn't take long before you start to self-assess and ask yourself why you're in corrections and what this is all about. And as it starts to develop for you, and this profession has surprised me. I didn't realize how important it would become to me. And so any opportunity to talk about the things that are in front of us, the things that we're trying to work out, how we can help each other, some practical application to what we've done. If we can throw the ball around a little bit and talk about what works at different places, we can make a difference. So that's kind of what we're hoping to do today, I think, a little bit. So
yes,
jump into it.
Awesome. Well, Rob, I know that something that we brought up in the last month in the first episode for season 3 was dealing with the House Bill 4972 and the similar bill in the Senate 3409, the quote unquote and Solitary Confinement Act. And I know that in conversations between NIJO that you've been involved in communication with them about that. And one of the things that I really think is important, and it's just like you just said, is that for those that are, they're not necessarily involved in politics, even on a definitely on a federal level, but on a
Mhm.
state level or local level, they're just coming to work, clocking in, and want to go do their job. They have
Yep.
their facility, their agency, their staff that they're trying to operate and do it in a professional manner.
Yep.
And then they hear some fellow on a podcast going, "Hey, by the way, they put these bills in place," and it can be very easy to look at that and the anxiety levels to go up, the
Mhm.
stress levels to go up, and think, great, now not only am I dealing with budgets and staffing and
Yeah.
disorderly inmate population or whatever, now I've got the federal government that wants to come in and tell me that I can do this and I can't do this, and I don't see any way out. So what I'd love for us to do today is being that you are a jail commander currently today. This is not a it's not a 5 years ago, 10 years ago thing. It's
Right.
it's today and it's tomorrow,
Right.
etc.
Yeah.
Um, is that first of all to really discuss why this has become an issue of federal legislation. Now, we know that there are those that uh love to focus on law enforcement, use law enforcement as a soapbox. But it almost seems like to me that they would be they would love it better if there weren't jails at all. You know, th-
Yeah. And I think, and that's where when you and I talked about this before, I think that's a really good place for us to start is why is corrections necessary at all?
yeah,
And I think if we can't answer that question, it's really hard to talk about the mechanisms that we use in incarceration. Um, when you think about a civilized society, if you think about what our world has done to deal with people who were dangerous. So let's talk about who the individuals are initially. Um, I can't remember the exact statistic, but it's pretty significant. It's between 70 and 90% of the people who are in your jails will be back in your communities within 2 years. Very,
right.
very high amount. So let's talk about who these people are. These people are your neighbors. And there's been a lot of discussion about what we should call inmates, whether we should call them justice involved people, whether we should call them detainees, all those different things that we should talk. And for me, as I've dealt with this internally, what I've realized is these are my neighbors. These are people that, and if you're in
Yes,
correction, that you're going to spend a whole lot of time with. You're going to see them at the local store. You're going to
right,
walk to them. They know you as well, probably better than they know most law enforcement folks. You're with them 8 to 12 hours a day, sometimes on a cell block. That's the one that you're assigned to for a very, very long time. So these truly are my neighbors. And one of the
right.
people when I first, it really surprised me. When I was a sergeant many, many years ago, I happened to be in the break room, and a gentleman who was, he was charged with attempted murder, and he was extremely violent inside the facility. We had to
Mm,
place him. He was in administrative segregation. We had what we called a two-man policy, which meant that we had to have two people there anytime we interacted. We had another mechanism that we call restraints only, meaning that if we're with him, he must be in restraints before we open the door, and all those types of things. This is a guy that, as a supervisor, I cut my teeth on this guy. I mean,
right,
we dealt with a lot of issues with him because he was extremely violent. He wanted to hurt us every chance that he got. And something happened in the court case. And if you're in corrections, it doesn't take very long before you start realizing that um, you really don't operate based on what's happening in the court system. Like
right,
we're set apart. Sometimes I don't arrest anybody. I don't release anybody. That's not my role. My role is that you're housed with me, and I'm going to take care of you until you leave. And I don't know if you're guilty or not. I'm not going to treat you like you're guilty. That's not my role, right?
right.
So I remember coming out of the break room, and I just dealt with this guy, and
Hmm.
something had happened, and I walked into another area, looked out the window, and saw him walking by in plain clothes because he had just been
Mm,
released. Something had happened in court, and he had just been released. And it just struck me that these people, if we don't make a change, or if we can't interact with them in a very powerful way while they're with us, these are our neighbors, and they will
right.
be in our community with us uh, within a very short time. So I've started really focusing on these are neighbors.
Yes.
These are my neighbors. that, and when you look at what law enforcement's responsibility is, their primary role, and I think sometimes this gets forgotten too, because law enforcement's responsibility is not justice. That's not law
Right.
enforcement. They are to interact at the point when bad things are occurring. They are called to an event or called to a circumstance, or they have investigated something that makes them aware that there is an ongoing issue that needs to be corrected, or somebody was harmed and they have to go get that person, but they are going into the community or called to the community to address something that's currently occurring, and they have to stop whatever's occurring so that the community can be safe again. That's
Right.
that's the role, right? And so they have three primary mechanisms. Number one, you can ignore it, which we see in a lot of places, right? If they don't feel supported. I mean, we hear all the time about larger cities and bigger areas where it doesn't matter if the state's attorney or the district attorney is not going to prosecute shoplifting, or they're
Right.
not. So they just start ignoring things. And once you start, I mean, that's one option. Another option is that you confine them until somebody who is objective can review the situation. So an objective judge can review the situation and determine what the appropriate course of action is. And if this person has significant mental illness, that's when everybody's defense can roll in and they can talk about the situation as a whole, what this individual is dealing with. But at that moment, there has to be a stop. We have to stop
Right.
whatever bad thing is occurring, right? So
Yes.
I could ignore it, or we can stop it and we can put them somewhere safe so that the people who are in the community are not continuing to be victimized or harmed. The
Mm-hmm.
individual is not harmed. The
Right.
community doesn't take on vigilantism, which
Right.
is what happens when there's not law and order. I mean,
Right.
how many times have you heard about someone who goes racing through your streets, and your neighbors are sitting around and you're talking about what you'd like to throw spikes out on the road because that kid
Right.
is through that, you got your puppies and your children. And if law enforcement doesn't engage with what is causing the unrest in the community starts to react. They
Yes.
begin to do things, and they start taking matters into their own hands. And that's not the way we've designed this system. We've designed the
Right.
systems. We need to have interaction with our neighbors if we can, but once we reach a certain point, we don't take those matters into our own hands. That's law enforcement.
Right.
Or the other thing that law enforcement finds itself dealing with is when they reach a level of absolute frustration, law enforcement then sometimes will choose to use coercive force to make things happen. And those violent interactions are those things that we can name them, that are in all of our big cities and have caused riots and all those things,
Right.
because for whatever reason, law enforcement decided to use some type of force in order to deal with a situation that may have been not appropriate to the situation, or at
Right.
least hindsight appears not to be until you
Right.
go through. But if law enforcement has confinement, if they have the ability to just go engage, stop the bad situation from happening, and take them somewhere safe, that's our role. And
Yes.
in my opinion, confinement is the greatest measure of civility that we could possibly have. If you look
Mm.
back historically, we would create walls around our cities, right? We didn't want people coming
Right.
in the middle of the night, in unfortified villages and cities, and harming our families, or destroying our livestock, or taking things. Or so we would create stockades and we would create walls, and then the people who were the offenders within our walls, we would push them out into the countryside and say,
Right.
you're not appropriate to be in our community. Well, after a while, you push enough people out into the countryside, and after a while, those people become a herd or a horde of bandits or
Yes.
somebody attacking us, right? So
Yes.
we said, okay, well, um, And, you know, then you have to have the king or whoever you're serving with in your caste system. You've got to have somebody who's giving you protection. And then you can't sell your crops and your animals and all the things that you need to, because on the way to market or on the way to the other city, you're
Yes.
accosted by these people, right? So what we did is we said, well, let's build walls within our cities, and let's take the bad people and put them in the walls.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of having walls where we can't go out because it's dangerous out here, we're going to take the bad stuff and we're going to put it in here. And for centuries, the conditions in those areas were abhorrent. They were
Right.
they
Yes.
were terrible situations. And so when you look at what we've done currently, when you look at how we're interacting and what we're doing to make a difference, corrections is the greatest mechanism of civility that we have ever conceived.
Right.
It's happening in our lifetime. How do I interact with neighbors who may be violent or may have severe mental illness or have what is our solution? And we go back, you and I've talked about this so much, but you go back and you start talking about mental illness in your facilities. I've been in places and we've had discussions. You know, Reagan often gets blamed for it. It was something that was occurring. It was moving way before him. I think in the 1960s they were already having this. But when they finally abolished the mental health institutions, there wasn't a clear path as far as what the community was supposed to do.
Yes.
Right. So what are you supposed to do with
Right.
with that? You just make a law and you say, well, it's gone. And then the law enforcement officer or whoever is called, or even the family before they call law enforcement, they have no recourse.
Yes.
Except to allow it to get really, really bad until something negative occurs. And so we have spent, you know, the solution, and Tate said it, him and I have talked about this a lot, but the interim solution when there is no solution is the jail.
Yes.
And there are community solutions, are the community issues that have no clear solution.
Yes.
It only makes sense that in your community as a whole, we believe, you know, when you start talking about, well, maybe, you know, you think of like the big federal organization, the big federal things that keep us all safe. What is it? You know, what is it? We have CIA and FBI, and we have all these, you know, we have the U.S. Armed Forces, and we have all these different things that in our minds, I can go to sleep tonight because there's somebody who's watching and somebody who's taking care of it, right? So in your local community, who is that? Who are the smart people that when there's an issue that is so beyond normal, who are the people that are figuring that out? Well, it's your local law enforcement officer who gets called at 2 o'clock in the morning, who shows up at whatever event there is, and what solution does he have?
Right.
And so, and do we ever want to go back? I mean, we've had this debate, even I've had it locally. We've talked about this quite a bit. I will never go back in time. To confine people simply for mental illness would be to reverse. I mean, we'd be walking into the dark ages. And so, absent a criminal charge, no one should ever be held in a jail, right?
Right.
But it's pretty easy for somebody who is mentally ill to get a charge.
Absolutely.
It's very easy to harm mom or grandma or somebody who's taking care of you forever if you're significantly mentally ill, or if you have co-occurring disorders, or if you're dealing with all the things that happens, right? And so who's dealing with it?
Right.
And here's the story. So, and interrupt me, jump in, because I just love this stuff so much, Aaron. I'll just talk. But here's the story though. So you have somebody who's in your community, and they are, for whatever reason, they have committed a crime. They're mentally ill. You bring them in. I don't know how old you were hiring correctional officers or what the requirement was in your state, But at 20 years old, I had a lot of life growing up to do. I mean, we send these
Right.
these
Yes.
we send these kids into the military and they fight for us. But when it comes to being in your facilities and dealing with it, I mean, I have 20-year-olds running my cell blocks. I mean,
Right.
we're at that space. And so, and my ratio for inmates is 1 to 60 on most of my cell blocks, and which is pretty normal. There's some people that are a little more, a little less, depending on classification. So I have a 20-year-old who is taking care of 60 inmates, who has to wake them up at 7:15 in the morning, who has to give them their breakfast, all of them, notify who the people are that have to go to court, get them
Right.
on the path for that. If there's any, major clothing issues that have to be addressed before they go to court, they've got to deal with that. We're still in a place where we require our correctional officers. I couldn't believe this when I started. We're still requiring our correctional officers to give them razors.
Right.
So we're giving people in a secure facility razors for hygiene. So I've got 60 inmates that I have to make sure that I get those razors back. Right. And then and I've got programs that are starting to come in. I have mental health in my facility. I have physicians that are coming around. I have nurses that are coming around. I have counselors that are dealing with perhaps the suicidal ideation watches that were started the day before and all those types of things. I've got, I'm starting to get them ready for court, ready to be moved where they need to go so that they can go through their day. All these things are happening at once. I'm getting my razors back and making sure that that's all safe. And I'm going to introduce into that environment. And I just explained the first hour of a correctional.
Yes.
That's all I did. I mean, if I wanted to go into the whole day of what it takes to make sure that they all have the clothing they have, they don't have contraband in their cells. There's no, there's no issues that are economies that are being created because of commissary or nefarious communication or shanks or shivs and all the things that we have to deal with while we're trying to work through. Notwithstanding, how am I supposed to deal with an extremely mentally ill person or an extremely violent person in my facility? What is my solution to that? I think we really, so number one is, so people that are asking us to make these decisions, people that are saying, we want to restrict what you're doing. And every conversation I have with folks, I say, please understand, like, I get it. Should there be better mechanisms than the jail for some of these issues?
Absolutely.
I'm not debating with you at all. My job is not even to make that decision. Like, that's not my role. I'm not the elected official who's making that decision. I'm not the law enforcement officer who was called out into it. I'm not the judge. My job is, I have a building that I have to keep secure. I have to make sure that the right people are in it, that the wrong people don't get in and the right people don't get out. I have to make sure that that happens. Right? I mean, that's what I'm doing. And then I have to make sure that everybody who is in that space is okay, not just my staff. I've got an 18-year-old kid who everybody from an 18-year-old kid who just got his first DUI because of a minor consuming. I got that kid who's wide-eyed and scared to death, and she is just like totally wigged out in my booking area. I've got her all the way to somebody who just committed the most heinous crime that you can possibly imagine. And people don't realize all of those people come to the county jail first. Nobody goes to Supermax first. They all come here first because they're not guilty yet. And so I take care of all those people. So that's what's in my world. And I'm dealing with that. Now, what mechanisms do I have? Because you don't want this in your streets. You've called law enforcement and asked them to come in and stop the bad thing that's happening. That's what you did. You called and asked them to stop it. Like I said, our three options, the best option is this one right here, where I took them to some very, very nice people who, no matter how many times I've been spit on, no matter how many times I've been called bad names, no matter how many times I've been punched, no matter how many times I've been told that they're going to go to my house and they're going to do bad things to my family, no matter how many threats I have to deal with, no matter how much stress I have, these nice people will take that problem that's handed to them and they will try to change the trajectory of that person in that moment.
Yes.
You're okay, whatever happened, happened, but now you're in my building.
Mm-hmm.
And now I have to take care of you. If you're willing to work with me, if you're gonna obey my rules, and that's what discipline is. I laugh all the
Right.
time when we talk about, like, people are like, well, I mean, did you get a new charge? Because I'm like, I don't need jail. They're already in jail.
Right.
Like,
Yes.
what is my win? I have
Right.
jail. Like, how far do we take this thing? They're already in jail. I'm not trying to win anything with discipline.
Yes.
The idea of discipline is that it creates order. Okay, that's what I'm
Correct.
creating. So if I use progressive discipline in some type of separation or some type of sanction, that I'm enforcing the fact that I require order in my facility so that the people who are in my facility are safe. That's what I require, right?
Right.
That's what I'm asking for. And if you won't comply with that, I may have to insist. And I will tell you that there's a lot of people that the first time anybody ever had the power to say no and
Correct.
enforce it is us.
Right.
And
Yes.
there are people that the first time they've ever run up against no, we are that brick wall.
Right.
And that's the first time they've run up to it. We are absolute. And these guys are master manipulators. They have spent a lot
Mm-hmm.
of time bullying. I don't know how many families I've talked to through the years where I've actually, they're all worked up because their son or daughter called them and they just said, they're just being so, they just lied through their teeth and talked about all the things that we're doing in here. And I've had to say, Mom, Dad, Grandma, I said, you have no reason to trust me. You have no reason to trust me at all. But has your loved one ever lied or manipulated you ever in the past? And the answer is always yes. And I say, is it possible that they're not being honest with you right now? Is it
Right.
possible? Is it possible that they're lying to you and that we are not doing the things to them that they are saying we're doing to them? Is it
Yes.
possible? And so the mechanisms that we have to make sure that this stuff works, the mechanisms that we have is we have the ability to separate people by classification. Obviously, I'm going to separate boys and girls. I don't want anybody to make babies in
Right.
my building. That's a big deal, right? I mean, and
Right. Yes.
forget about that. We've got that national legislation that's bouncing all over the place. And I completely disagree with ever putting two people in the same room that can make a baby. I think that's a bad
Right.
idea. Right.
Yes.
So that's a thing. I've got to separate those individuals who can't do that. Then I have to look at a person's, and you talked about it a little bit with Tate last month, but I have to look at, there's three things in my classification system. I have their current charge, and that's a deal. What are they currently here? Why is this happening? If you've ever been to my facility or been to a facility, what is your previous behavior in that facility? That's a
Right.
component. That's part of this three-legged stool that we work on. And then what is your current behavior? And if you haven't had any previous behavior, and if you haven't had any current behavior for me to watch, sometimes all I have to go on is what your current charge is. And that's
Yes.
why we have classification reviews after a certain amount of time. And that's why we look at this. In my facility, we have a classification meeting that happens every single week where every single person who's on any type of restrictive housing is looked at. We don't put somebody in a hole and forget
Right.
about it. That's not what
Right.
we do. We look at that person and how can we progress them? So I'm using some mechanism of classification to determine where they need to be housed.
Yes.
And if I'm housing somebody whose classification or would indicate that they are unsafe either for themselves or for the other people they're going to interact with, I have to keep all those people from being harmed.
Right.
And so I have to use mechanism. I don't know about you, Aaron. Did you have a building where you had some hole somewhere that you could go throw people in and forget about for 30 days? I mean, we
No.
don't even design jails to do that
No,
anymore.
absolutely not.
I mean, that's not
Absolutely.
even most of our administrative segregation and our separation. And I have to deal with law enforcement and state's attorneys and federal prosecutors who are like, I can't believe that you allowed this person and this person to talk. If you've ever been in a jail at all, like I can't sew their lips shut. Like they
Right.
have the ability,
Yes.
they have the ability to communicate.
Right.
Most of my restrictive housing is in a cell block with
Right.
multiple cells in it.
Yes.
They're
Yes.
interacting with each other all day. My law enforcement people or my correctional officers are moving around, talking with them all day long. They're talking with nurses and all those people all day long. And so there's no loss of interaction with these
Right.
people.
Right.
We're interacting. There's no hole that we put them in, but I might
Yes.
have shut a door on them.
Right.
And I might have said, you can't come out until you, and we've done something too. We talked, you and I talked about this. What are some like practical mechanisms? Because
Yes.
if we don't take care of this on our own, right? This bill now, this is just one more in a lifetime of people who don't understand our business and who are going
Right.
to try to make a change. And
Yes.
maybe the loved one or the person that they're representing has communicated in such a way to them that they think they are doing the best. And I'll give people the benefit of the doubt. I think you said it in the last podcast. Nobody wants this.
Right.
Nobody wants to put people in this space.
Yes.
Nobody wants people to feel like this. We don't want to lock. How am I going to get my neighbor rehabilitated and back
Correct.
next door to me if I can fine him for the 2 years that he's with me or whatever's happening,
However
right?
long. Yes.
Yeah, that's not a thing. So um if I'm looking at my mechanisms, we have decided, we have done something, I think it's really cool. We created a tier system. And so even the DOJ, when they talk about restrictive housing, they talk about 23 hours a day being
Hmm.
the criteria for restrictive housing, right? So we have looked, how can we minimize those hours that they're completely separated from everybody else?
Yes.
So we have multiple tiers. So even and let me be really clear, there's a big difference between classification and discipline.
Yes.
Classification is where I need to house you so that the people that you're with are not harmed, or you're not negatively impacting that environment. Discipline is my enforcement, my reaction to your bad behavior, my emphasizing that I'm not going to tolerate you disrupting my facility. And I
Right.
have progressive things, like you said, taking away commissary, maybe I'll limit this, maybe you will not, we say lockdown, but maybe you will not be allowed in the day room for this amount of time, right?
Right.
So you lose day room privileges. You're locked down for a time. That's completely different than a classification where I've
Yes, it
said this
is.
person is separated from these other people. Okay, so if I've had to put them in that classification, and in our facility we've got three main classifications. When we're in that place, you have involuntary protective custody. Sometimes people don't know that they need to be protected. They
Correct.
don't know how dangerous it is. They don't know how bad their charges. They don't know that prisoners are not politically correct, right? They don't know.
Right. Yes.
So sometimes there's involuntary protective custody. Sometimes there's protective custody where the person has asked for it and they've said, I know that this is bad for me. I need to be
Yes.
protected. And then there's administrative segregation. There's an administrative decision where I've said, you cannot be out with other people. But
Right.
what we've done then is, so if that's the top rung of it, a lot of times within a week or 2 weeks, which is why we meet every week, we recognize that two of these people who are in administrative segregation, they might be able to get along together.
Hmm. Yes.
Maybe they don't need to be completely separated, but they could handle one other person. And so
Right.
we have our second tier and we say, okay, you two can be together and you can take both of your hours that you have out and you can have them together. And now the two of you are 2 hours out together a
Right.
day. You're sharing your time out, right? The
Yes.
cool thing about that is we've moved under that 23-hour mark now,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
And we go as far as to say, maybe there's three of you that can be together. So now three of you, because like you said in the last podcast, it is more work on me to deal with these people behind a door. Like
Right. Yes.
general population, like here's all of your trays. That's a lot easier than going to every door and collecting the trays. Come up to the med cart, please, so we can give your
Right.
medication. Is a lot easier than packing it up and going and doing it. If you stay in any cell for any length of time, your behavior and what you do to that room and how nasty it gets and us keeping it clean. I mean, the more we can get you out in the day room, the more you can clean your cell and do the things that's just better. The more hygiene we can
Yes.
get, more times I can get you to take a shower. Like, we like it when inmates take showers.
Right.
I mean,
Yes.
that's a thing, right? So, so if I'm looking at all this and I'm trying to decide what's best, well, then I'll take them to tier 3, and I'll say, well, let's get these people as much time out as we can. And when you fail the 3, I'll move you back to 1 and we'll start all over again.
Right.
And I can just keep working. But if I can get you to a space where you can be trusted with other people, I have people who have been charged with murder who classify medium. They've been in my facility so long for their case, they actually classify medium. They're no issue at all for me, because they've been with me so long. I know who they are. I know how they interact. And I have people who are in here for disorderly conduct that I have to put on administrative segregation because they are absolutely out of control when they're inside my building.
Right. Yes.
And that's no charge, right? So how do we, don't take away. I get that as a community, you want to have different mechanisms. I understand that. I understand that you don't think as a community, you would like there to be more for people who make mistakes than just jail. I totally get that. I encourage it. Please, as your community,
Yes.
go find ways that the judges and the state's attorney and everybody can say, this is a diversion that we can use in our community. But please don't come into my building and take away my tools to keep that 18-year-old girl safe who's in here for minor consuming, and the guy who does not know that those child predatory charges will get him beat up in jail. No way for me to protect him 24 hours a day unless I segregate him into a space where he's got more protection. Please don't take those. And I will tell you, mentally ill people, just because they're mentally ill does not mean that they're not violent.
That is correct.
Some of the largest, most violent people that I've ever met have also been mentally ill.
Right. Yes.
So how do and people ask us, well, I mean, why does it take so many of you guys, and inmates will say that, how come so many of you guys have to come tackle me, or so many of you have to come in to deal with it? Because if I take 5 people and one grabs each foot and each hand, and we help you to the floor, our chances of harming you while we're taking control of you is significantly less. This isn't a tool pile. This is me finding using as many people as I can to stop whatever violence you're doing and get you into a space that we need to be in. So that was me talking a lot, Aaron, but that's where where the rubber meets the road for me as an administrator is, one, should we have confinement? Yes, I believe it 100%. Do we have people who we need to protect from each other while they're confined? Absolutely. We have a responsibility to those people just as much as we have to anybody else. Do I think that there should be better mechanisms, and should we as a culture continue to advance and look for better things? Should you be developing electric cars while we still have gas cars? Absolutely. But please don't outlaw the gas car.
Right.
Work on the other thing and let us continue to do what we need to do while you're figuring that out. Because a lot of initiatives haven't worked. And they've tried them, and it's been worse than when they first started. So let's keep your civility and your humane safety intact. Allow us as jail administrators and jail professionals, allow us to keep everything copacetic while you're coming up with a grand new idea that's going to help everybody. Vet it, try to figure out what needs to be there. And then if you can move more people out of my building into those programs, wonderful. But we have over years learned that this is how we keep people, our staff, the inmates, everybody safe inside our buildings. Don't take that mechanism away from us.
Absolutely. Well, Rob, that is phenomenal stuff. I appreciate. We've got about a minute and a half left, and so I'll take that to say that for those of you listening to this, obviously there's local components, pieces that you may have that are a little different than Rob's got there in South Dakota, but the key is not to settle in and say, well, either A, we've always done it this way, we have to do it this way, or B, some expert said we have to do it this way, so I have to do it that way.
Yep.
Eyes open. If it works, it works. If it doesn't, it doesn't. But ultimately, our responsibility is safety and security. And if we're maintaining that, we're doing our job. So, Rob, again, I greatly appreciate your time today. And I know
Thank you
that
so much for just your friendship. I mean, what NIJO has meant to us through the years, all the things that, you know, as a facility, having that group of people who is fighting for us, helping us see what we need to see, showing us where the fences are and keeping us safe. You're a huge part of that. This podcast is. And so I'm just so grateful for you taking the time to visit with us today. So thank you so much.
Well, I'll tell you what, every time I talk to Rob, it is an awesome opportunity. And I'll tell you, someone who likes to talk and communicate, and Rob is another one of those. When he and I have the opportunity to sit down and talk, it is both going 90 miles an hour, but so greatly appreciate him being on the show with us this week. And I hope, guys, that you were able to get some good thoughts, some good tools, some good things out of this. As of right now, the House Bill 4972 and Senate Bill 3409, they have not made it to being considered by committee. The bills have been introduced, and that's as far as it's gotten. But yes, you can contact your senator, you can contact your representative in the House of Representatives and say, hey, look, as far as if you're going to represent me, kill this. I don't want this. But that's on a big picture sale, on a litter picture sale, in your agency, in your facility, in the housing unit that you're responsible for. If we make sure that we're doing the best we can to take care of these people, to provide the safety and security they need, to provide the care that they need, to maintain that control, to maintain that custody, we are doing our jobs. And so take what was discussed today, and I hope that it's very practical, very beneficial to you. As I mentioned at the front end of this show, greatly appreciate you being with us. Hit that like, hit that subscribe. Tell some folks that you work with about what's going on, and get the information out there. So hopefully we can be as much of an encouragement and help to as many people as we can. Appreciate you being here. Look forward to being with you again, Lord willing, next week. But in the meantime, stay sharp, stay safe, stay vigilant. Godspeed.